figure out what solution are we offering here, you are actually best positioned to solve that problem because no one else has seen it as many times as you have.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpas. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm excited today to be joined by my friend, Chris DuBois. We're going to say it with the French name because we're two French guys. I know we got some French Canadians listening that are just really excited that I just said that correctly. Chris is a coach and advisor to agencies, is an experienced agency executive himself, and we became friends recently through this incredible event he puts on called the All In Agency Summit, which brought together like a bunch of my favorite people. We had a blast. We all did sessions. There's a great attendance, great feedback on that. So with all of that said, Chris, really appreciate you making the time to be on the show today.
I appreciate you having me.
I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You're one of my favorite people to chat with. You're just so easy to talk to, and you know a lot of things, but you are very humble about it. So I'm going to ask you now to do something that you might find uncomfortable, which is to, in your own words, share who you are and what you do.
So, that is a loaded question. So I am, I guess, an agency coach who is trying desperately to help agencies of usually on the smaller side, because I find them way easier to work with as far as speed to action. But I was, as you said, an agency executive as I came out of the Army. I started at a marketing agency, and which is kind of weird, right? As an infantry officer, you would think I'd have some sort of job options, but apparently the business world does not consider toting a rifle around and jumping out of airplanes and all of that a good skill for this. So anyways, I worked at a marketing agency. After 9 months, I became their head of operations. And then a couple of years later, became CEO. And then just recently stepped down to start working with other agencies. And so I'm doing that. I run, like you said, the All In Agency Summit, doing that a couple times a year just because I love bringing other just experts into a room. Like, how much learning can we pack into one place and provide this value for free so that everyone can benefit from this. And I'm trying to run as many of those events as I can through my business, which is the Dynamic Agency OS, because I am going to be the first person to tell you I don't have all the answers. And so the idea of the Dynamic Agency was like, let's find the right person for you to bring them in so that we can get you the answers you need for your business. So I don't know if that answered it, but
Yes. And so in summary, you have a military background, you then left the military, jumped into an agency and quickly scaled up the ranks there to become CEO. And now you are coaching and advising other agencies through Dynamic Agency OS. And I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, but I think it's a great question. Was like, before we get into the topic du jour, which is really about the nuances of positioning and getting into like problem and solution centric positioning. Before I ask you about all of that, I'm just really curious, what, if anything, do you think the military taught you about business, or some of the most essential skills that being in that very different environment you think have translated and colored your perspective on running an agency?
Yes, there are a lot of things that I think I took for granted in the military that were very beneficial moving into the business world. The ability to just step into a job and figure it out on the fly, because you just have to. I kind of learned that not a lot of people are wired that way, to be able to just go like, hey, this is what we have to figure out. So like, let's go. Oh, you have to do this presentation in 2 days to a group of people around this topic you've never presented before. It's like, good, it's a challenge, right? Let's go. Doing that, the leadership skills, which I want to clarify a point. I don't know if this is going to be valuable for everybody, but just because someone was in the military does not make them a great leader. I'm throwing it in. Some of the worst leaders I've ever worked with came from the military. Some of the best leaders that I've worked with came from outside of the military. And so I just want to clarify that one point. But because it's way harder, right? When you have to actually motivate people because there's no uniform code of military justice they have to obey. Yeah. Anyways, we're deviating here, but it's always one of those sticking points for me. But yeah, I think the leadership lessons, the things that I learned there, working with a team, being able to look at a team, identify who should go in the right role and advance there, right? In the military, it's literally a life or death thing. I want the guy who can actually run this equipment right the first time. I want him running that equipment right. So I'm going to put him in that position. When you look at a business, it's like we kind of get in the mindset of it's okay if we screw up a little, like we got some more wiggle room. There is no life or death thing here. But if you treat it like one, then you're going to make sure that the right people are in those right seats and that you're doing all the right things. You're giving them the right resources. You're training them with the right skills. You're doing all of those things so that, they can actually run that completely. They take full ownership of it and it benefits the team.
So that brings us to the thing that we're going to focus on today, the big idea, which you described as service saturation. And I think that it is, from my perspective at least, the byproduct of our entire industry being obsessed with the idea of niching down, specializing, positioning over the last, really decade, but closer to 2 decades as, there's just been more and more and more competition in the agency space. But from my perspective, there's kind of 2 things at play here. One is a misunderstanding of what that really means. And the second is the fact that early on in this kind of advent of positioning, just being like, hey, we offer this service was enough to differentiate yourself, because agencies before were just agencies and they helped with marketing. And there wasn't really this specificity that existed. Like, it wasn't that long ago. You go back and that's what everyone else's positioning was. So, let's start there. What is this kind of issue with service saturation? What's the challenge that you see firms running into as they start to go down this kind of positioning path, but just start focusing on the services that they sell?
Sure. So service saturation, I think, is a result of like an agency life, excuse me, being so accessible now, where, like we were talking earlier, anyone with a laptop and an internet connection can become an agency and they can provide these services. And so now if you go search SEO services online, you're going to find just tens of thousands of agencies that you would have to sort through to do this. And now if I'm a buyer and I'm trying to find that right agency, one, I'm probably going to just lean on referrals because there's way too many agencies to go sort through. But it also means if I am sorting through them and I'm using a directory or something, I'm going to be comparing mainly on price and deliverable of the actual assets you're giving me. And that's generally where agencies focus. They're going to, like, an SEO agency is going to say, hey, I'm going to give you 4 blog posts a month. I'm going to give you, maybe an SEO audit for your site every month. We'll give you these reports. And if that's all you're giving me, then that now becomes something I can go look at other agencies and just compare purely on price for those, right? We stop thinking about the outcomes and we're just thinking about the output. And so, and to make things even worse or more competitive, right? AI has come in, and now some intern at one of your clients' companies can, through AI, create those blog posts that you're doing. And yeah, they might not be like as SEO optimized, but in the short term, they don't know that. They think what they just created is awesome, right? They don't know that 3-6 months down the road, it's not going to have the same results because SEO is a longer term, game anyways. And so you're in competition now, not only with all of the agencies, but with newer technology that's taking those services and making them kind of move. Like, anyone can come in and do this. And so what I'm trying to help agencies do is actually move away from services and start focusing on solutions to problems.
It's an important distinction. And of course, we had a brief chat before we started the episode, but like, that has been the most important piece of our own positioning at Parakeeto. And in fact, we've probably wasted close to $1 million in both money and time, close to 4 years, by not being clear about this and by being too focused actually on the arbitrary mechanisms by which we solve a problem rather than on the problem itself. It's like, are we a software company? Are we a consulting company? Like, what what are the nuts and bolts of what we sell, which was far less important than what is the problem that we solve and how do we solve it actually. And so talk a little bit more about, why agencies end up in this position of niching, but only to the degree that they're specifying what services they sell. Let's start there. How do we end up there? Why is that such a challenge?
So I think most agency owners just don't know anything otherwise, right? Most of the agency founders that I've talked to are accidental agency owners. They were really good at delivering some creative. Like they have some way of doing things that they really believe in. They know they can get a great result. So they start building an agency around them. But being, an awesome, creative does not make you an awesome business leader. And so as they start going up, you start looking at, well, what's everybody else doing, right? What is that agency doing on their website that I can emulate in order to make it happen? And really, if everyone starts doing that same thing, right, we're going to get the same result everywhere. And so I think that's the first piece that they kind of get locked in. Then there's also this idea that most agencies, I've never heard an agency say lead gen is never an issue, right? That's always one of those things that if you're like, hey, I can solve for your lead gen, they're excited. They don't believe anyone can actually provide for it anymore because, again, service saturation, you get so many people saying, we can get you all these leads. Doesn't happen. But so with lead gen, if they have a lead coming in, they really want to be able to take that money, right? Like there are so few leads that they want the revenue. And by wanting that revenue, you're going to start saying yes to the things that people want. And that keeps you in this kind of service-based mindset because you're just thinking, how do I give them more blog posts? How do I do, whatever it is that they need me to do? To the point where you'll even take on more services that you're not an expert in just to make sure you can secure that deal. Very frequently, it's like the whale client that'll have you doing it when they say we're looking at adding some paid ads. You guys know how to do that? You're like, oh yeah, we can figure that out. Right. But if you went to a mechanic, you're like, hey, my brake lines feel off. Can you take a look? And they're like, yeah, we got it. And then you see the mechanic go in the back and type in how to fix brake lines. Right. You're going to be like, whoa, hold the phone. Right. But for some reason, we don't care when we're taking someone else's business, taking their money, knowing that it's probably going to be our reputation that gets destroyed if we can't do this. Right now, you're potentially ruining that entire relationship because you said yes to doing something that you shouldn't be. But it's all because we're just tied to how do I bring in the money with these services and just stay attached to those.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it. So the alternative perspective to this is shifting away from positioning using these kind of very tactical, vertical and horizontal slices. So vertical would be, horizontal would be like, oh, we do SEO and Facebook ads. And vertical would be like for X person, for SaaS companies, for home services companies, et cetera, right? That's how most people articulate their positioning. Your perspective is there's actually a better way to do that. And we're aligned on this because this is what we've done, is more problem solution centric. So what's that shift? How do you go from this kind of very tactical grid-based segmentation to a more of a problem-focused positioning? And why might you want to do that?
Sure. So the first probably month to 2 months with my clients, all we're doing is focusing on nailing down one audience with one service with one problem. And we can dive into each of those, but the audience, right? Let's make sure it's someone we want to work with. Let's make sure that you're going to be going at some point to conferences with these people, right? You're going to be talking to them on sales calls, having them as clients. If you hate them right now, you're probably not going to like them anymore in the future. And when they bring up a problem, you're not going to like them more. So let's find people that we actually want to work with. They need to be easy to find, right? Like we have to be able to target them directly, which just means we need to be able to create that clear ICP, essentially, right? They need to have money. That is one that surprisingly comes up a lot, where someone will want to offer some service to someone, and it's like, these people don't have money to be able to afford that, right? So how can we either move up market or just find something else that we can do for them that, doesn't do that anyways. But so with that, we want to get just very granular on what that individual looks like and then nail it. Vertical positioning is fine, right? If we want to work in a specific industry, that's really important, I think, because when we look at the problem, which I use what I call the Prism Model. So, okay, 30-something% of businesses fail because they're not solving a problem market needs, right? Can you imagine? I mean, I know you can imagine this. You've probably thought through it. But creating a business and then taking it to market, like you've spent years working on this, like just thinking over it, and then you go and nobody wants what you have. It's like,
I've done that before, actually.
Oh,
several times.
Well, there you go.
Are you really an entrepreneur if you haven't had an idea that you try to back into the market and failed miserably at?
Right. Right. So I created a model called the Prism Model, which essentially is just a way to vet out if a problem is worth, if it's deserving enough to build a business on it. Right. And so you want to know is it painful, recurring, impactful, solvable, marketable. And it's going to fit somewhere on all of those. It's a spectrum for each. If you can get it on the upper end of all of them, it's a super deserving problem. But if it's really going to be somewhere in the middle, right? So something might be super painful and you're like, okay, we can solve this, but maybe it's not very recurring. So like take taxes, right? Happens once a year. You have to go through your taxes and do all that, but it is painful if you don't do it. On the impactful side, like, yeah, if you get it wrong, there's a lot at stake. Is it solvable? Like, yes, we can do it in these different ways. And then is it marketable? Yeah, like we can go target the individuals who have this. There's a growing TAM every year, right? So you could build a business on that. And obviously we know because there's already people doing it. But you can run any idea through that. Excuse me. So once you have that problem, you can go back and look at your audience, and where we say, hey, this is a vertical positioning. If, say, I help HR director solve something very specific, a HR for a tech company is going to look very different than HR from a manufacturing company. And so the vertical positioning now creates this lens through which we view that problem to be able to actually engage people and talk about it in a way that resonates, right? And where I think a lot of agencies also get stuck there. It's like, well, we solve this problem, we can do it for everybody. But the problem does change by person to person, and your messaging is not going to get specific enough to actually attract those people. So we have that. And then the last one, the one service. The idea is, especially with smaller agencies, you can't be an expert at everything. There are a lot of agencies out there that decided they want to be full service agencies. And that's fine. But I think part of it, you have to acknowledge that the customers, the clients who are looking for a full service agency are not looking for expert results in everything. They're looking for convenience, right? Otherwise, they would go find the best ad person. They would go find the best, SEO person. They would find those individuals who are the best at everything. But instead, they want one person they can go to knock everything out. They still want great results, but they're prioritizing convenience over that.
I would actually argue that in a lot of cases now, especially, the argument for the, full spectrum agency is actually exactly what you're describing. I think that what the client actually wants is one person that deeply understands their business and can solve the entire spectrum of their problem. I think this is where it becomes clear how arbitrary the service-based positioning becomes, because it's like, it doesn't matter what the services are. It matters that you solve the problem. And any combination of services, even if that leads you back to being a full service agency, as long as that's actually the best way to solve the problem repeatedly, that's the right answer. And then we can have a whole separate conversation about how do you structure the agency so that you don't actually need to be an expert in all of the pieces of that process and still be able to deliver a good, consistent outcome to the client and be profitable and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a key point. That you don't have to be the expert. you can be the person bringing in the experts. And a lot of the differentiator, I guess, that I'm going to lean into right here for this specific piece is that the full service agencies that rather are like 10 people, 15 people, and they're not outsourcing. They're saying we can do this all in-house, and you just can't. And they're also not anchoring to a problem, which if we were anchoring to that problem, we would design a solution. And maybe there's always going to be a core service, right? That we have, something that we're known for, but we're really developing it into that solution. And so this might only be one piece. And then the kind of unifying item there, which I think you even just got into, was like, I want a strategic expert, right? Agencies have this ability to get repetitions faster than anyone else because you're in the services space, right? Your client is going to see a problem once, and they're going to try figuring it out. Maybe they solve it, maybe they don't. But like, that's it. That's a problem. They want to change something on their website. They can only change one thing at a time. Otherwise, their tests are going to interfere with each other. But you, as the agency owner, can go try this out with all of your clients right now, right? You can be testing out at 10 times the speed. And so you really have this ability to become an expert much faster and be that strategic person who can come in and give insights that your client doesn't have. And so when we can figure out what solution are we offering here, then you are actually best positioned to solve that problem because no one else has seen it as many times as you have.
Yeah. And I think I'll speak to this because like we're a case study in this shift of like really understanding like, okay, we need to be problem first. And actually I developed this other framework that I'll layer. I really like your Prism framework. I'll append my framework to it, which I call the 4 times MVP, right? So it's a play on minimum viable product and the misconception that minimum viable product is like the starting line for like a new business. But what I always say is, well, there's 3 Ps that come before the product. The first is the problem. So minimum viable problem. Is there a problem? Prism is a great spectrum to add to that. The second is minimum viable point of view. So like, do you have an actual point of view on like, why does that problem even exist in the first place? Why is it not solved yet? Why are the ways that people are trying to solve it today not working? Or maybe why did they used to work, but now in this new world, because things have changed, it's not working anymore, right? So do you have an actual point of view here that resonates with people? When they hear it, they go, yes, that is my lived experience. I think that's something we've done very well at Parakeeto because we get that feedback a lot. Then it's minimum viable process. So like, do you have a set of steps that when executed consistently produce a solution to this problem? And at that point, like when you're in the figuring out the process part, profitability, what services it is it scalable? It's like none of that really matters. It's just like, can you figure out a set of steps that repeatedly generate the outcome? Then you can start to think about like, can we turn this into something that has unit economics that can scale? And then that's when you arrive at minimum viable product, right? How do we take that process, package it up into something that can be sold at unit economics that scale? And so it's like, we struggled because we didn't go through all 3 of those gates before arriving at product. And it's when we like really deliberately went through all 4 of those steps in sequence and really got the process dialed that things got unlocked for us. And I think that that's really important to what you're saying because it's so easy to skip over those things. And especially the point of view, like you can tell when an agency has positioning and then you just like apply a little bit of pressure to it. And you're like, oh, you have absolutely no point of view on this whatsoever. Like this is just empty.
Yep. So I had to write that one down because I love it. It fits almost perfectly with. So I have this Venn diagram, 3-way Venn diagram model. I'll send you after if it fits in show notes. I don't know if it goes up like that, but the idea is like when you piece all these together, you get certain benefits. And so like when you have one service and one problem, you're able to create a very specific process, right? You're able to actually, and when we get into profitability, we can talk about that. I'm able to now create a very systemic approach to solving this. And so my team can actually get really good at this and we can do all these things, but that's part of that packaging of a process. Like, do I have something that can take people from point A to B? And then on the point of view, my favorite exercise is to just get my clients riled up and like tell them to just start ranting about this problem, go. And then I'll just keep egging them on and like finding ways to to annoy them, I guess, within the conversation. But they start saying these things that it's like, this is why I don't like this and why this needs to change. And you get a very like genuine point of view from that. Hey, throw that transcript in AI, pull it out, and you can create your own little narrative about why this matters, why it's important to you, right? Like it's, I think, that's probably the most fun that I have in the initial steps of client work.
That's such a great way to do it, right? Really asking them like, what pisses you off about this thing? What do you see in the market that really makes you upset? What are people getting wrong about this thing? And you like, if you don't think you have a point of view, you probably do if you're asked to answer these questions. And I'll add something to all of this. It's just our lived experience where the biggest mistake we ever made was we were too caught up in, are we a software company? Are we a consulting company? Are we selling education? So that was product. Those were product questions before we really understood, like, what does the process need to involve? And what we came to the realization when we really got focused on the process was, well, it has to be all three of those things. One of those things individually doesn't solve the problem. And I think agencies are probably having a very similar experience where if you feel like you're fighting against your own services, like because they're just actually not congruent with what clients need, and you constantly have these same issues of clients failing to get the outcome because of something that was outside of the purview of your scope, but it was like completely arbitrary, or because there's something else downstream that they're running into, or because they keep asking you for something that you're not offering them, so they go to someone else that does. It's like, that's probably a sign that you need to take a step back and actually look at the problem you solve and the process you solve it through, and then really take a hard look at what services you offer, and really almost just kind of let go of that lens and just think purely through a process perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That was the case for us anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, I can see it happening with other agencies all the time. Yeah.
So I think that this is where we're headed, and there's a lot of downstream impacts to this. So we'll get into operations, what happens when you kind of take this problem-centric positioning. I think this is where everything is going, because this is what positioning actually is. And so as we mature as a market, and positioning is now table stakes and niching is now table stakes, the only place for us to go is getting better at it. And we're seeing that happen, right? And there's more people talking about this, yourself being one of those people. So more and more firms are going to have a problem-focused positioning. Let's talk about what that changes for them operationally. How does this, start to change the way you operate on the back end, and how it might affect your profitability or even your business structure?
Right. So I guess let me take one quick step back. So when you have the one audience, one service, one problem that you're working towards, that's really what you need for the base to be able to create that one offer, which is essentially your solution, right? And with that solution, now you're promising an outcome, not outputs. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can play that out, right? It's really hard to like guarantee results when you're in marketing. It's almost impossible. But you can be working towards certain things. I think there's a couple other ways you can kind of massage that, and so that it works. But now operationally, right, we have this offer, and it is the offer. Like, so everything that we're doing is around, how do I get this result? It's not creating custom results or custom goals, right, for every single client. It's not reworking entire systems to be able to give that one massive client exactly what they want. It's like, no, this is the problem that we solve. We know this is that dream outcome that everybody wants to achieve. Here's the process to be able to get there. And so now operationally, right, everything that you're doing is building those reps to get better at getting those results. So something I see very frequently from agencies is that they will start documenting their processes and capturing everything so that they can build some of that efficiency, but they're doing it before they've had this great outcome. And so everything that they're replicating with this process is just mediocrity, right? They're just doing the same okay work over and over, and then they're wondering why nothing's ever getting better. And so at first, I recommend you actually do things very manual, and you get that awesome result so that you can then package what done looks like, and it's going to be amazing, right? And then every so often you can go back and you can like relook at your process, but like, we're not looking for efficiency at the start. We're looking for really like innovation. And I've used this, I call it the efficiency innovation continuum, where just imagine like a bar going out, right? Efficiency on one side, innovation on the other. Every agency gets to choose where they want to be on this continuum. If you want to be a super just efficient machine, right? Like a factory line, then you're going to be on that side. And your profitability is going to be awesome because you can forecast exactly, right? Like every little piece because you're just following steps. You're doing everything in a very specific way. On the innovation side, you got to have some wiggle room. You got to be able to try new things, do stuff. And you can't always predict what that looks like when you're on that side. At the same time, it's necessary at points, right? And so you got to figure out like, what's my, I don't know, where do I want to lead my agency on this spectrum? What am I willing to accept, not accept here in order to get whatever result? And it can fluctuate. But then, so you pick that, then we can actually get into, okay, like now let's get this outcome based on what our aim is, and then start working on the profitability and all of that after.
I'm really glad you brought that up because, we had this conversation a couple weeks ago in leadership training with our team where we talked about the difference between things that we do that are optimized for outcomes versus things we're doing that are optimized for learning, right? And to your point, that kind of exists at a macro level in the business. Like as a business, what mode are we in right now? Are we in innovation mode or are we in kind of outcome and scaling mode? And that is going to be a pendulum that tends to swing over time. Early days, you're very much in innovation mode. It's a lot of learning. And then when it's time to scale, you might harden some of those things. But then also at a micro level, you might have a service offering, your main offer, where it's like 85% of it works really well, but there's 15% of it that's not working the way that you want. And so there might be a quarter where you compartmentalize saying, okay, we're going to experiment a lot in this area. So that's a big idea. It can exist at a lot of levels, but it is important to understand where you sit on that spectrum or where you are at a given moment in time. And it does change the way that you think about documentation. Like this was a big unlock for us was we were writing really detailed SOPs about things that weren't mature, and they just slowed us down, and they created more switching cost and more drag on the ability to actually iterate in that area. And then it was actually Allison Caffrey that said, hey, why don't you just document standards when you're in this kind of more blue ocean area of the business, and you write down what should be true at the end, and you leave the rest of it very open-ended, but at least that helps you anchor the process. And it was like, that was a big idea, but it was helpful, right? So it really does change execution where you sit on that spectrum, both as a business, but also within compartments of the business.
Right. To take it one more layer, something when AI rolled out, I saw a lot of agencies trying to use AI on the innovation side. Right. They were taking the thing that they were good at, the creative stuff that they were known for, and trying to use it to just do more of that. When if they had flipped it and gone to the efficiency side and said, what tasks do we only look for that outcome for, like, really, because it's just like something that we do, right? It's something that we know if you have these inputs, you're going to get this output. So we can now create the prompts and everything to get that exact output from this AI, freeing us up to be able to do more on the innovation side, right? To do more of what we're actually good at, what we're known for. And I think once you start getting into that, and so it's like, all right, how can I just be using tools in order to free myself up to be more innovative? Now your line on that spectrum can start shifting a little more depending on what you want, because you have tools who are doing a ton of the work for you anyways, and you're able to now stay flexible.
Now, this leads into, I think, one of the biggest benefits to profitability that we've seen. So I'll just share some observations, right? You talked about now you have a problem, then the goal is let's build a process. And the thing about a process is that if you're solving the same problem with the same process, you do that thing over and over again. And so, of course, there's risk involved with innovation. That's true. There's investment involved. There might be some short-term detriment to your efficiency, to your profitability, but the upside is you figure out a better, more efficient, more performant way of doing that thing. And when you solve one problem with a repeatable process, there is a compounding return to that thing. So you're in many ways, you're completely changing the risk profile of investing in innovation, and it creates a really strong incentive, which then reinforces your actual competitive moat. Like there's more longevity to being an expert in solving X problem for X business with this process that you've been investing in continuously than being an expert at SEO. There just is. So I think that's one of like the big ways in which you see profitability be greatly affected by this, but there's also more longevity to that margin wedge that's created. And I think if we've seen anything in the last 5 years, especially, it's that if you don't have a lot of defensibility around your service offering, those margins can get pressed very, very quickly and go away very, very quickly in terms of, how much competition can enter the market with very, very little time lag to it.
Right. Yeah, you just got me thinking about something. So like this concept of attention debt, where no matter what you do with your business, you are accruing some form of debt. And if we're just bootstrap running our company, right, I can only give so much attention to one area of my business at a time. And so if I want to focus really on marketing, it means sales is going to get a little less attention right now, right? We can try to span out, make it even and stuff, but just bear with me for the metaphor. A way to remove some of that attention debt is to take on actual financial debt, right? By finding investors, finding like people who give you money so that you can go faster in all of these places by applying, like paying for other people to give attention to these things. Through the use of tools now, however, like AI and creating, even just having a process, having a very dedicated process for what you're doing, you don't have to pay attention to the same things. You pay attention to one thing. Right. And everything is feeding into that. And so it makes it easier to now maintain everything that's going on in your business instead of feeling like you're being pulled in all these different directions.
Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about here, which is, we talked about it earlier. Let's say that this path, this problem solution path, leads you to a place where all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, we're kind of becoming more of a full spectrum agency because this problem requires us to not only do the thing that we were doing before, like SEO, for example, but it's like, turns out our clients also need help with their website because there's a lot of problems we can't solve for them without actually modifying their website. And it turns out that they also need help with writing content. And it turns out they also need help with getting backlinks. And it turns out they also need help with these three other things: their strategy, their brand, their, brand narrative, their tone of voice, their whatever. They need help doing industry research that we can then build content strategies on top of. I'm stretching this, but you get the idea. It's like, turns out for us to really solve this problem, we actually need to be doing a lot more. And we're not experts on those things. And we don't have the budget to go hire the experts to come and do those things. This is where I think it leads us to what I think the future of our industry is, by and large, which is internal specialization, and a world where firms really understand not only what their position externally is, this is who we serve, this is the problem that we help them solve, but also internally, we are experts at X, Y, and Z. We're really good at sales, account management, and strategy. We're not good at link building, content writing, technical SEO, website design, development, management, but we know other people that are. And so we're going to sell that whole solution to the client. We're going to hang on to the stuff that we're the best at. And we're going to scale that internally. And then we will partner with other people. And basically, the supply chain gets fragmented, but each player within that supply chain gets increasingly sophisticated at that one piece. The same way that's how it works in grocery. That's how it works in airlines. That's how it works in every other industry that is much more mature than the advertising industry. And it has to be that way, because the margins get increasingly tighter and you have to be an expert at that one little piece to carve out enough margin to survive. So that's my POV on where this is headed. I'm curious if that tracks with kind of how you've seen some of the firms you've worked with to position in this way start to evolve in terms of their internal structure.
So it tracks almost perfectly with what I'm seeing and thinking, because I am also working with Partner Hub, which I think you're aware of, but for everyone else, go check out Partner Hub. We have some data coming out, research report Alex is finalizing right now that's coming out probably this week. So should be out whenever this goes live. Just talking about like how a lot of agencies are not leveraging partnerships the way that they could, but the ones that are becoming the most successful right now, that have the largest profit coming in, period, like through their ecosystems and stuff, are using partners. They're doing co-marketing, they're doing co-selling, they're taking actions to create a better result for their audience so that they can then capitalize on that, right? And so something that Lachey Lewis brought up a great example at the All-In Agency Summit, where she works bottom of the funnel content very specifically, right? she has like friends or like other partners who do very specific things that almost work like in a funnel approach, where it's like, before you can do bottom of the funnel content, you really need someone who can help you with your messaging. Like, what are we doing? And so she has a friend who's a consultant who just does that. And now if someone comes to her, she can refer them out to this person to get that problem solved, knowing this person is going to refer back to them. But right now, and again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, so many agencies are just afraid to get rid of those leads, to pass off some of that revenue, and they want to keep it all to themselves. So they're going to keep stacking services, but not actually get a great result, not be known for being really good at one thing. But if you can find some other agencies that you can trust, they will send you leads, right? When it's not a great fit for them, or because of whatever that problem that they solve is. And if you're doing the same, you can build a very awesome strategic offering that, I hadn't considered. Well, we had done some of this when I was running an agency where we would have leads that weren't a great fit for us. And we had partners who we could send them to. And we'd also train these partners for how to do things the way we did a little better. So they were able to actually increase their rates. So now we took a little off the top from those engagements, but the partners were already making way more because we showed them how to, essentially double for some of them, how much money they were making. So like that is a great model to be able to, send out the leads that you are getting, the ones that aren't a great fit for you. Then you don't have to worry about that one-star review, right, in your directory that you're playing, just because that person wasn't a great fit for you anyways. It's like, you don't let your reputation be destroyed just because you want that money so bad you're willing to take on anybody.
Yeah. There's two things that I'll articulate here to kind of wrap this up. The first is that I can attest to, in the work that we do, auditing firms, and we've done a lot of audits, the most profitable firms that we've looked at unequivocally are the ones that are internally specializing and are focused more on quality of revenue than quantity of revenue. Now, the model that we've seen most commonly is not an arm's length partnership. And of course, this is like a massive spectrum. It's like, I sold you the $20,000 thing. I only do, half of the work on that. The other half, I partner with somebody, but it's all white label. So the client is interacting with me. They bought the thing from me. Just like, if I buy a ticket to fly Air Canada, well, Air Canada is probably not doing any of the food. Air Canada doesn't own any of the real estate at the airport. They probably don't do any of the cleaning on their own plane, right? So like there's a lot of elements of that experience that are not actually Air Canada doing them. It's a network of partners that all come together to make that experience happen. But I don't really care. I paid Air Canada. I'm dealing with Air Canada. This whole experience is Air Canada. In fact, most of their support probably isn't even them. Doesn't matter, right? So that kind of same idea. And then the rest of the spectrum is kind of more what you're describing, which is like referral networks or, very much arm's length. It's clear that everyone's doing different stuff. And there's all kinds of different combinations of those things that can end up resulting in a good outcome. But the thing that we can definitely agree on is the data from what we've seen is that a focus on quality of revenue leads to higher profitability. And it also tends to lead to faster scale. So I can think of one agency in particular that we worked with that scaled to 8 figures very, very quickly. They had incredible profit margins because they focused on just the thing that they were greatest at. They partnered with white label partners to do the stuff that they were not great at. And here's the other incredible thing. When clients would cancel, they went as far as to refer those clients to other partners of theirs, and they monetized their own churn. So they were still getting 10 or 15% of the contract after the client canceled. Like this was the extent to which it was brilliant, right? So I think that is, we're seeing it already. The trend of white label agencies and these kinds of arrangements, it's happening. It's, I think, where things are headed. And I think it's something that people really need to start considering is like, what are we actually good at from an operational perspective? Downstream from the first thing that I think is the foundation of this, which is like, what problem are we solving and how do we solve it? And once that's clear, then you can start to break down the chain of things that need to occur and then really start to focus in on like, hey, what part of this do we want to own? And what part of this can we start to build alliances so that we're giving the whole thing to the client, but we don't necessarily have to take on all the complexity of that.
I'm going to take that churn idea.
Were you interviewing me or was I interviewing you? I forget.
Either way, I love coming into shows where I can learn something too. So
it's my show. I do what I want. Chris,
there we go.
You've been awesome. I always love talking to you. For those that are interested in learning more about you and what you're doing, where should we send them in the show notes?
Sure. Dynamicagencyos.com is my website. If you just want to hear more, actually, your episode of Agency Forward podcast goes live next week. And so it'll be out before this. If you guys want to hear me actually interviewing Marcel, you feel free to come in, tune in there. And then, we just got more all-in agency summits coming, more other events coming down the road. And so, yeah.
Amazing. So with that, scroll down in the show notes, you'll find links to Chris's information. Definitely recommend following the podcast, following him on LinkedIn. And with that, Chris, really appreciate you making the time to be on the show, man. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at Parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.